The bank manager turned the monitor toward me and said, "Miss Torres, according to the commercial credit package submitted to us, you own 51% of Coal Meridian Supply." The air conditioner above her desk clicked twice, and the paper cup beside my elbow smelled faintly of burnt coffee. I kept both hands flat on my knees. There was my full name on the screen, along with my home address, my veteran status, and the month and year I had left active duty. Then I saw the signature. It looked like mine until I reached the last letter. For years, the T in Torres had ended with a curve beneath the line, but a tendon injury in my right hand during my final deployment changed the way I signed my name. For 6 years, the stroke had ended short and sharp, which made the old flourish on the screen feel like a fingerprint from another life. It was wrong. Someone had copied a version of me that no longer existed. The manager, Linda Cho, folded her hands over a yellow legal pad. "We have 17 documents carrying the same signature." "I did not sign any of them." She stopped tapping her pen. "Then this is not a billing dispute. I had come in because a credit alert showed a commercial inquiry under my social security number, tied to a company I had never heard of. Until that moment, I assumed Ethan, my fiancé, had listed me as an emergency contact for something connected to his family's struggling supply business." Linda opened another page from the lender file. It described me as the majority veteran owner and managing member of Coal Meridian Supply, then attached a biography that had been turned into a sales pitch for a company I had never owned, managed, or even known existed. I pulled a black notebook from my purse. Linda lowered her voice. "There is something else you should see." Near the bottom of the application was a sentence Judith Cole, Ethan's mother, and the chief financial officer of his family company, had said at dinner less than 2 weeks earlier. "A veteran name opens doors civilians spend years knocking on." I had smiled when she said it. Now the fluorescent light reflected off 17 signatures that were supposed to be mine, and the muscles in my right hand tightened around a pen I had not yet uncapped. I stopped asking whether someone had made a mistake. I started asking how long the people I was about to marry had been using my life without me. I met Ethan Cole at an airport rental counter in Denver, which was probably the least romantic place either of us could have imagined. My flight had been delayed twice, his luggage had gone to Phoenix without him, and the woman behind the counter told us there was one mid-size car left. We both reached for the keys at the same time. Ethan stepped back first. "You look like you need it more." I looked down at my army duffel, then at his wrinkled suit and one dress shoe with a broken lace. "You look like you lost a fight with a baggage carousel." He laughed, and that was the first thing I liked about him. He did not seem threatened by a woman who answered questions directly, nor did he ask the usual question about whether I had ever shot anyone. He just asked where I was headed and whether the coffee near baggage claim was as bad as it smelled. At 40, I was finishing a medical retirement after 18 years in Army logistics, procurement, and contracting. The work was rarely glamorous. I dealt with supply chains, vendor compliance, emergency purchases, and the kind of paperwork nobody noticed until a hospital needed a part that had been sitting on the wrong loading dock for 6 hours. When people asked what I did, I usually said, "I make sure the right things get to the right people before somebody starts yelling." Ethan thought that was funny. His mother did not. Judith Cole met me 6 months later at a steakhouse outside Richmond, where the butter came shaped like roses, and she wore pearls despite the August heat. She looked me over once, long enough for me to notice. "So you are in logistics," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Warehouses?" "Sometimes." "Trucks?" "Sometimes." She smiled as though she had solved me. Ethan tried to help. "Maya handles contracts, too." Judith waved one hand toward the breadbasket. "Well, every organization needs administrative people. Robert used to say the paperwork people kept the rest of us from getting sued." I remember Ethan glancing at me, waiting to see if I would correct her. I did not, because long before I met the Coles I had learned to let results answer for me. That habit served me well in uniform. Inside a family it was less useful. Robert Cole had built Cole Industrial Components almost 30 years earlier. The company supplied fittings, electrical housings, safety hardware, and specialty fasteners, the unremarkable pieces that kept larger machines from becoming expensive piles of metal. At its best, it supported nearly 40 employees. Then Robert had a stroke. He survived, but speech came back unevenly and he never returned to full-time work. Ethan became company president, while Judith, who had always handled the books, moved from informal control of the finances into the chief financial officer role. By the time Ethan proposed to me, the company was carrying more weight than either of them admitted in public. A major customer had moved production overseas, 2 contracts had not renewed. Material costs had climbed, and a warehouse expansion Robert approved before his stroke left them carrying debt at exactly the wrong time. Ethan never gave me the full numbers. He would say, "It is tight, but manageable," or "We just need 1 strong year," then change the subject to the wedding, or ask whether I wanted another glass of wine. Judith preferred a sentence with more gravity: "We are protecting what Robert built." That phrase ended every argument. I understood loyalty to an institution maybe too well. After I retired, Ethan asked whether I wanted to consult for the company, but I had spent 18 years with being responsible for things that could not be allowed to fail. I wanted 6 months where the most urgent decision in my life was whether the porch needed repainting. He didn't push. For my retirement, he gave me a fountain pen with my initials engraved on the barrel, a black lacquer with a silver clip that caught the kitchen light whenever I opened the box. "For signing something that belongs to you for once," he said. I kept it in the top drawer of my desk. A week later, on a humid Saturday with cicadas rattling in the maple trees, Ethan helped me repaint the porch railing. We argued for 10 minutes about whether the color was gray or blue, got paint on the dogwood leaves, and ate grocery store sandwiches sitting on the front steps because neither of us wanted to wash our hands enough to use plates. Nothing important happened that afternoon. That is why I remember it. At one point, I fell asleep in a lawn chair with a paint rag over my knee. When I woke, Ethan had moved the can into the shade so it would not skin over, and an old beach towel was folded behind my neck. He was on the driveway trying to free a moth from a puddle with the corner of a paint stirrer. I watched him for a while before he noticed I was awake. There are people you trust because they save you in dramatic moments. I trusted Ethan because for a long time he was careful with small things. Judith gave me a framed photograph from my retirement ceremony and said, "Now you can finally have a normal life." I let the sentence pass, partly because I wanted the same thing she did, though probably not for the same reasons. A year later, Ethan and I were engaged. He was patient with my habit of sitting where I could see restaurant exits, knew I still woke before sunrise when there was nowhere to go, and never teased me for checking hotel doors twice before sleeping. I remembered those small accommodations later. The first time Ethan asked for my military separation papers, he said their health insurance broker needed proof that I had other coverage before we married. I handed him a copy without thinking twice. The first time Judith asked for my service biography, she said the local Chamber of Commerce wanted to feature veterans connected to business families for Memorial Day. I emailed her a version I had written years earlier for a retirement program. The first time Ethan asked how veteran-owned business certification worked, we were eating takeout Thai food at my kitchen table. A paper carton had leaked coconut curry onto one of the placemats, and he was trying to wipe it up with a napkin while he asked whether a veteran only needed to own part of the company. "Ownership is not enough," I said. "Control matters too. It has to be real, not just on paper." He dipped a spring roll into peanut sauce. What counts as control? Actual decisions. Management, long-term direction, and signing authority all matter. If somebody is using a veteran as decoration, paperwork does not make it legitimate. He smiled. "Good thing I am not planning to make you work for my mother." I laughed, and he went back to fighting the curry stain. There were signs the pressure inside Cole Industrial was worse than Ethan admitted. One Sunday, Robert set the old brass caliper he still carried from his factory days beside his plate and asked why one of the company trucks had been sold. Judith answered before Ethan could. "Idle assets cost money." Robert looked at his son. Ethan kept cutting his steak into pieces that were already small enough. Later, while I helped clear the dishes, I saw a lender envelope half hidden beneath a stack of grocery circulars. Judith slid it into a drawer before I could read more than 2 lines. $420,000, renewal due in 60 days. I rinsed a plate and let the water run over my fingers. It was their company, I told myself, their history, their debt, their problem. The clues were so domestic that I stepped over them without feeling the floor change beneath me. People who know you well rarely need to break into your life. Sometimes they only have to wait until you hand them the keys. I did not call Ethan from the bank. Instead, I sat in my car with the engine off while rain ticked against the windshield and the credit alert glowed on my phone. There had been a time when Ethan was the first person I called when something went wrong, but 18 years in contracting had taught me a rule that mattered more now. When a number does not make sense, do not argue with the number. Preserve it. Linda printed only what the bank was authorized to release to me and stamped each page with the date and time. Before I left, she gave me one piece of advice: do not use any phone number or email address listed in these documents to investigate them. Verify everything independently. I wrote that sentence in my black notebook, then drove home. Ethan texted while I was stopped at a red light. "Dinner at Mom's tonight? Dad wants to see us." My thumb hovered over the screen. I almost typed, "We need to talk." Instead I wrote, "Sure." That was the beginning of my silence, but it was not the silence I had practiced around Judith for years. That kind had been avoidance. This one had a purpose. At home I searched Virginia's public business records. Coal Meridian Supply existed, and it had been formed 7 months earlier with the same principal office address used by Coal Industrial Components. The registered agent was a filing service in Richmond. That was all the public record could tell me about ownership. Virginia does not keep a public list of the members or managers of an LLC. The 51% claim, the management authority, and the veteran ownership language came from the private credit package somebody had submitted to the lender in my name. I called Linda back and asked that the application be referred to the bank's fraud department. By late afternoon, I had also called Priya Nanduri, a civilian attorney I had once faced across a procurement dispute. Priya had been irritating, exact, and usually right. That made her useful. I told her only what I could prove. A company I did not know had applied for commercial credit using my social security number, military background, and a signature I disputed. She was quiet for several seconds. "Do not accuse anyone yet." I was not planning to. Good. If those documents are false, the most valuable thing you have right now is that the people who submitted them do not know you know. Priya told me to freeze my credit, preserve every email and text related to the coal business, and request copies of any lender records I was legally entitled to receive, because the application identified me as an owner and guarantor. She also told me to save the original credit alert instead of relying on screenshots alone. Personal messages too, I asked, especially personal messages. Intent likes to hide in ordinary conversation. By 5 o'clock, 3 folders sat on my dining table. One was for the company, one for my identity, and the last was for Ethan. My hand stopped over that final tab before I wrote his name. At 6:30, we drove to Robert and Judith's house for dinner. Ethan talked almost the entire way about a supplier in Ohio, a new construction customer, and the possibility that the company was finally turning a corner. I watched the highway lights pass across his face. He looked like the same man who had moved a paint can into the shade for me. That made it harder to breathe evenly. At the coal house, Robert sat in his usual chair by the window, turning his old brass caliper between his fingers. After the stroke, words sometimes arrived slowly for him, but his hand still remembered tools. When I bent to kiss his cheek, he squeezed my wrist. "Good girl," he said, one of the phrases that still came easily. Judith came from the kitchen carrying wine. Maya, perfect timing. During dinner, she talked about a new opportunity. Not a contract yet, she emphasized, an opportunity. A federal subcontractor needed a veteran-owned supplier for part of a manufacturing package. Ethan glanced at his mother, then at me, just once. Judith kept talking. "They are very interested in companies with the right qualifications." I set down my fork. "What qualifications?" Her smile held. "Quality systems, financial stability, and certain ownership characteristics." The words were careful enough to leave no fingerprints. Robert tapped the caliper against the edge of his plate. Once, then again, the room shifted. Judith reached for her water while Ethan answered too quickly. "Just restructuring, Dad." Robert frowned. "Name." "You do not need to worry about that tonight," Judith said. He pushed the caliper across the table until it stopped in front of Ethan. Robert had used that tool for decades to check whether a manufactured part matched the measurements promised on paper. "If it measures wrong," he said slowly, "it is wrong." Nobody answered. After dinner, Judith asked me to carry coffee into the living room. When she opened a kitchen drawer for spoons, I saw the fountain pen Ethan had given me for my retirement. Black lacquer, silver clip, and my initials on the barrel. My right hand closed around the edge of the tray. "My pen," I said. Judith looked down as though she had just noticed it. "Oh, Ethan brought it over a while ago. He needed a nice pen for some documents and forgot to take it home." A nice pen for some documents. I lifted the coffee tray. Sounds like him. That night after Ethan fell asleep, I opened the top drawer of my desk. The rectangle of clean wood where the pen had rested was lighter than the dust around it. I photographed the empty space, then the retirement card Ethan had given me with the pen. His handwriting was still there, for signing something that belongs to you for once. The next morning, the bank's fraud investigator sent Priya the portion of the credit package that identified me. The operating agreement listed me as the 51% member and gave me authority to approve bank transactions, negotiate contracts, appoint managers, and direct long-term business decisions. I had never exercised any of those powers because nobody had ever offered them to me. Another attachment described Cole Meridian as drawing on my nearly 2 decades of military procurement experience. A certification worksheet represented me as the veteran who actually controlled the company, not merely someone whose name appeared on paper. That distinction mattered. Federal Veteran Business Certification requires real veteran ownership and control, not a paper majority created for an application. Priya called while I was still reading. "Maya, this is not somebody borrowing your name." I looked at the empty pen drawer. Then what is it? "They designed the company around your identity. The question of whether the Coles had used my name was finished. The one that replaced it had teeth. How much of my life had they already sold?" 3 days after Priya told me the company had been built around my identity, Ethan invited me to a private dining room above a restaurant near the James River. He called it a family celebration. I already knew what they were celebrating. Cole Meridian did not have the subs contract yet, but the lender had advanced the credit package far enough for Judith to believe the hardest part was behind them. When Ethan and I arrived, champagne bottles sat in silver buckets beneath a printed sign that read Cole Meridian Supply, built for the next generation. Nobody in that room knew I had spent the previous 72 hours preserving documents with a lawyer. Judith kissed my cheek. "Tonight, no business talk until after the first drink." That told me there would be business talk. Robert sat near the end of the table with his brass caliper beside his plate. When I took the chair next to him, he touched the back of my hand and nodded toward the company sign. "Yours?" I looked across the room at Ethan, who was opening champagne for his mother. Apparently, dinner began with stories about the old company. Robert's first warehouse, the summer Ethan swept floors. The night Judith drove through snow to deliver a box of fittings because a customer's line had stopped. Those stories mattered. Nobody in the room thought of themselves as thieves. They thought they were saving something, and that belief made every shortcut easier to rename. After the entree plates were cleared, Judith stood with a glass in one hand. "I know the last 2 years have been difficult. Robert built this company with his hands. Ethan has carried more than any son should have had to carry, and all of us have made choices we did not want to make." Then she turned toward me. "Sometimes help comes from places we do not expect. Maya spent 18 years serving this country. Now that service has opened a door for this family that might otherwise have stayed closed." Ethan stared into his glass. Judith raised hers higher. "To Cole Meridian, and to Maya, because after all those years in uniform, it is nice to see that experience finally become useful for something close to home." The room answered with the soft scrape of chairs and raised glasses. My thumb moved once against the stem of mine. She had not praised my judgment, asked for my consent, or mentioned a decision I had made. She had thanked a credential attached to my name, as though it had been sitting unused in a drawer. Ethan lifted his glass last. I watched him. For 3 seconds he could have put it down. He knew what his mother meant, knew which documents existed, and knew I had never agreed to own Cole Meridian. He drank anyway. Until that moment I had kept building explanations for him. Maybe Judith had done more than he knew. Maybe somebody at a filing service had misunderstood instructions. Maybe Ethan had signed something careless and planned to fix it. The champagne touched his mouth and those exits closed one by one. We build escape routes for people we love. Sometimes we keep building after they have already chosen the fire. Judith sat down. Ethan reached under the table and squeezed my knee. "You okay?" "Yes." He relaxed a fraction. 20 minutes later, the banker who had been invited to dinner stood to leave. He shook Ethan's hand and said, "Once we get the managing member acknowledgement, We should be able to finish our side. Ethan's fingers tightened around his glass. Judith immediately asked Paige whether she wanted cheesecake. I said nothing. On the drive home, the windshield wipers clicked across a dry windshield twice, before Ethan realized he had turned them on by mistake. Halfway there, he cleared his throat. There is something I need you to sign. I kept looking through the passenger window. What kind of thing? Nothing dramatic, an acknowledgement connected to the new company. The company your mother toasted me for? A short sound came out of him, almost a laugh. Yeah, I waited. Maya, it does not change anything for you. It is mostly technical. What am I acknowledging? That you are aware of the ownership structure. I turned toward him. His jaw had gone rigid, and his right thumb kept rubbing the seam of the steering wheel. Why would I need to acknowledge an ownership structure if I am not an owner? It is complicated. That question is not, he swallowed. My mom found an opportunity. The veteran ownership made us eligible to pursue it. Us, he said us. When were you planning to tell me I owned 51% of a company? He glanced at me too quickly. You already know? I did not answer. The silence answered for me. Ethan breathed out through his nose. Nobody is trying to steal from you. Did you submit documents using my name? My mom handled most of the paperwork. That was not my question. The lane markers passed beneath the headlights in steady white intervals. He watched them instead of me. We were going to fix everything once the financing came through. There are moments when a relationship does not break with a shout. Sometimes it breaks with grammar. Everything once. At home, Ethan went straight to my office and opened the top drawer of my desk. He stopped when he saw the empty space where the fountain pen belonged. What are you looking for? I asked. That pen I gave you. Why? For the acknowledgement. I folded my arms. You want me to sign a document about a company I supposedly already own? His face lost color. It is not what you think. I had heard variations of that sentence from vendors and officers caught between what happened and what they wished had happened. Repetition rarely improved it. I opened the cabinet beneath my bookshelf, took out a blank legal pad, and sat at my desk. The file box Priya had helped me build stayed closed beside my foot. What are you doing? Ethan asked, writing down this conversation while I remember it accurately. I wrote the time, the date, and his exact sentence about fixing everything after financing came through. He stepped closer. Can we please talk about this like two people who are getting married? I looked up. I thought we were doing that before you made me the owner of a company without telling me. His mouth opened, then closed. I capped the cheap black ballpoint in my hand. Sleep somewhere else tonight, Maya, please. Not tonight. At 11:14, the front door closed behind him. At 11:22, I photographed the legal pad. At 11:37, I sent Priya 3 lines. He knows. He participated. I am ready to proceed. For days, I had been documenting what happened to me. That night, the legal pad stopped being a record of damage and became the first instruction in what came next. Priya arrived at my house the next morning carrying 2 coffees and an empty cardboard file box. She set the box on my dining table, checked that Ethan had returned his house key, and then pushed 1 coffee toward me. 1 copy stays with me, she said. 1 copy stays somewhere he cannot reach. The house felt different without him. The refrigerator hummed, the porch paint can was still on a shelf in the mudroom, and his coffee mug sat upside down in the drying rack where he had left it 2 mornings earlier. I had slept less than 2 hours. Priya reviewed the notes I had written after Ethan left. When she reached his statement about fixing everything after the financing came through, she tapped the sentence once. This matters because of sequence. They did not plan to ask permission and then act. They planned to finish the transaction first and turn your consent into cleanup. She slid an identity theft affidavit toward me. I signed with the cheap black ballpoint from my kitchen, and the last stroke ended short and sharp. Priya compared it with the signatures from the credit package. We will pull older verified signatures too, bank records, medical forms, retirement paperwork. If the questioned signatures were copied from an old specimen, the pattern should show. We spent the morning building a timeline. Cole Meridian had been formed 7 months earlier. 5 months earlier, an email account using my name had been created under the company domain. 3 months earlier, the business had applied for commercial financing. 6 weeks earlier, it began pursuing a federal subcontract that depended on veteran business eligibility. At no point had anyone contacted my real email address. Priya sent formal notices to the lender, to the company, and to the team handling the veteran certification file. The notices did not accuse Ethan or Judith of a crime. They stated that I disputed every signature, had never consented to ownership or control, and objected to any continued use of my military records or identity. This is the line, Priya said. Before written notice, they can try to call things confusion. After written notice, every new use is a new decision. By early afternoon, the lender's fraud investigator called. His name was Malcolm Reed, and his voice stayed so, even that I could hear the clicking of his keyboard between questions. Have you ever authorized Ethan Cole or Judith Cole to sign on your behalf? No. Have you given either of them power of attorney? No. Have you ever represented yourself as an officer or managing member of Cole Meridian Supply? I had never heard the company name until this week. Malcolm paused. A file can satisfy a checklist and still fail identity. He placed the financing request on hold while the bank reviewed the disputed documents. The veteran certification file could not move forward normally either, because the very fact it depended on was now contested, whether a veteran actually owned and controlled the business. The first independent break came from the notary listed on one of the ownership acknowledgments. Her name was Colleen Marsh. She worked from a small office above a shipping store in Chesterfield, where a plastic ficus leaned toward a window and the wall clock ran 4 minutes fast. Priya contacted her before anyone from the Cole family could shape the conversation. Colleen checked her journal. There was an entry under my name, but I had never appeared before her. She had no copy of my identification and no memory of seeing me sign or acknowledge anything. She remembered Judith. Mrs. Cole brought several corporate forms in, Colleen said over speakerphone. She said the signatures were already done and the filing deadline was that afternoon. I knew her from church events. I thought it was routine. Priya's pen stopped moving. An acknowledgement is about the person appearing before you, not the reputation of the person carrying the paper. Colleen went quiet. Then she agreed to preserve her journal and provide a statement. That gave us more than a different-looking signature. It gave us a broken verification process. The third layer arrived the following afternoon, when Malcolm released the portion of the lender file containing communications about my identity and supposed control of the company. Judith had written most of them. Maya is not involved in day-to-day correspondence because of ongoing medical issues related to her service. Ethan has authority to answer operational questions while Maya transitions into the business. Maya prefers not to participate in video calls but has approved the structure. Each sentence used something true about me to support something invented. I did have medical appointments. I did avoid unnecessary video meetings. I had retired from the army after an injury complicated another full assignment. They had taken ordinary facts and arranged them into permission. Then I reached an email sent 6 weeks earlier. The lender had asked for a live conversation with the veteran owner before advancing the application. Judith forwarded the request to Ethan. We need another way around this. Your wedding is still months away, and she will start asking questions if we push her now. Ethan answered 23 minutes later. Use the medical retirement explanation. Once the contract is moving, she will not pull it apart. She will not risk Dad's company and everyone's jobs over paperwork. My eyes stayed on the last word until the letters lost their edges. Paperwork, that was the category he had put me in. Not a fiancé whose name had been used without permission, but an obstacle he believed could be neutralized by appealing to payroll and guilt. Judith replied with one sentence, that is why this works. My right thumb pressed so hard into the edge of the laptop that the nail turned white. Ethan knew I would think about mortgages, health insurance, children, and the people on the warehouse floor before I thought about punishment. He had not mistaken my silence for consent. He had selected it as part of the plan. Priya closed the laptop. You do not have to decide every remedy today. I looked at a payroll list Malcolm had included. 14 employees had been transferred from Cole Industrial into Cole Meridian. Most had no reason to know the new company existed, partly to support a certification strategy. One name stood out. Tessa Green had worked for Robert for 16 years and managed quality inspections. Her husband had died the previous winter, and her youngest son had just started community college. At the celebration dinner, Tessa had raised her glass to me. She thought I had saved her job. I folded the list. Stop the financing. Stop them from using my name. But do not freeze ordinary payroll if the bank can avoid it. Priya studied me. That limits some leverage. I am not using employees as pressure. They already are. Then that can be the difference between us. Priya nodded once. At 4:17 that afternoon, the lender confirmed the financing hold. At 4:43, Ethan called for the fourth time and I answered. What did you do? He asked, corrected the record. You froze everything. Payroll is still moving. A pause. He had not known I would separate the workers from the people who made the decision. My mother says the bank is treating this like fraud. That is the bank's decision. We can fix it privately. You had 7 months to speak to me privately. His breath scraped the microphone. You do not understand what happens if the company collapses. I looked at his email on the table. You counted on me understanding exactly that. He said my name. You did not use my signature because you trusted me, I said. You used it because you trusted my silence. I ended the call. That evening, Judith sent a message saying the family attorney would prove I had approved everything verbally. An hour later, Priya received their formal response denying wrongdoing and attaching a new managing member acknowledgement with another version of my old signature. It had been created after they received written notice of my dispute. The ink was dark and the flourish matched the specimen from my retirement materials. Priya enlarged the scan, then looked toward the empty space in my desk where the fountain pen had once rested. They just made this much worse, she said. The next morning, Priya filed a civil action in Chesterfield Circuit Court asking for declaratory relief and a temporary injunction. She was not asking a judge to decide criminal guilt in a single hearing. She asked the court to stop Ethan Judith and Cole Meridian from using my name, veteran status, military records, or disputed signatures to obtain financing or represent ownership while the case moved forward. Virginia circuit courts can decide actual disputes over legal rights and can issue injunctions to preserve those rights while a case is pending. That was the lane we needed. The hearing was set for Tuesday. For the first time, the people who had spoken for me would have to defend their version in a room where the record, not the family, controlled who got the last word. The hearing took place in a second-floor courtroom at Chesterfield Circuit Court, where the wood benches were polished smooth and the ceiling vent made a faint whistle whenever the air came on. Priya sat on my right. Across the aisle were Ethan and Judith, now with separate attorneys, while Robert sat behind them with his brass caliper closed inside one hand. Nobody had required Robert to come, he had insisted. Judge Elaine Bell entered, looked over the stack of exhibits, and made the limits clear before anyone could turn the room into theater. This is a hearing on temporary relief, she said. I am not deciding criminal liability today. I am deciding whether disputed documents may continue to be used while the parties' rights are litigated. That sentence steadied the room. Priya began with the credit package. The lender's investigator, Malcolm Reed, had appeared under subpoena with the records his fraud unit relied on. He identified the 17 signatures submitted in connection with Cole Meridian and the older retirement materials supplied as identity support. Priya placed 6 years of verified signatures beside them. The difference was not dramatic, that was the point. My recent signatures ended with a short final stroke, while every questioned version carried the old curve I had stopped using after the injury to my hand. Malcolm adjusted his glasses. The bank's concern is not handwriting alone. The applicant used an outdated signature specimen, an email account the customer says she never controlled, and identity documents routed through people other than the customer. Judge Bell looked at me. Did you authorize the account or these signatures? No, ma'am. She turned back to the exhibits. The second layer was Colleen Marsh. She walked to the witness chair holding her notary journal against her chest. Under oath, she admitted that I had never appeared before her, that she had not checked my identification, and that Judith had brought in documents with signatures already on them. Judith's attorney asked whether anyone had ordered Colleen to ignore the rules. No, Colleen said, so the decision to notarize was yours? Yes, Priya stood for one follow-up. Did Maya Torres appear before you and acknowledge that signature? Colleen looked at me for the first time. No, the answer landed without volume. A notary acknowledgement is supposed to confirm the person who appears, not the reputation of their person who carries the document through the door. Whatever mistake Colleen had made, her journal could not manufacture a meeting that never happened. The third layer was intent. Priya displayed the lender's request for a live conversation with the veteran owner, followed by Judith's email asking for another way around it. Then came Ethan's reply about using my medical retirement as an explanation and trusting that I would not risk the company and its jobs over paperwork. The courtroom stayed quiet long enough for someone in the hallway to roll a cart past the door. Judith stared straight ahead. Her attorney rose. Those messages show poor judgment under financial pressure. They do not prove that my client believed Miss Torres would never consent. Priya did not argue with him. She moved to the next exhibit. It was the acknowledgement submitted after my written dispute, carrying another version of my old signature. Priya placed the disputed acknowledgement beside my verified signatures. Old signature, new document. After notice, the courtroom went still. Beside it, she placed a photograph of the black fountain pen Ethan had given me for retirement. My initials were visible on the barrel. Judge Bell looked toward Ethan. Mr. Cole, your response filed with the court states that Miss Torres had verbally approved the ownership structure before these documents were submitted. Is that your testimony today? His lawyer leaned close and whispered something. Ethan rubbed both palms over his knees. No. Judith turned so sharply that the chain of her glasses struck her necklace. Judge Bell waited. Then tell me what is accurate. Ethan looked at the floor. Maya knew I had asked questions about veteran-owned businesses. She did not agree to own Cole Meridian. Nobody moved. Who created the email account in her name? The judge asked. I did. Who gave Mrs. Cole the service biography and separation records? I did. His voice had become so low that the court reporter asked him to repeat the answer. Judge Bell glanced at the disputed acknowledgement. And the fountain pen. Ethan closed his eyes for a second. I took it from Maya's desk. My mother used it when she copied the signatures. Judith whispered his name. He kept going. I knew Maya had not agreed. I thought if we got the financing and the subcontract moving, I could explain it later and give her real control. Judge Bell leaned forward. Was she intended to exercise actual control before the money was released? Ethan's fingers stopped moving against his knees. No. The word was small enough to miss in any other room. Here it ended the version they had filed. Robert placed the brass caliper on the bench beside him. Metal touched wood with a soft click, and Judith's shoulders moved as though she had heard something much louder. Her attorney asked for a recess. In the hallway, Ethan came toward me before his lawyer caught his sleeve. Maya, I told the truth. I looked at the red exit sign reflected in the courthouse window. After every other version stopped working, I was trying to keep Dad's company alive. My name was not working capital. He pressed his lips together. I never wanted to hurt you. I could see a pale crescent of dried porch paint near the edge of his thumbnail, left from some repair he had done at his apartment, or maybe from the old can in my mudroom. For 1 second, I could see the man who had moved paint into the shade so it would not skin over. That man had existed, so had this one. Intent does not return what you took, I said. The hearing resumed. Judge Bell read her ruling slowly enough that nobody could pretend to misunderstand it. The court found enough credible evidence of unauthorized use to preserve the status quo while the case proceeded. Ethan, Judith, and Cole Meridian were temporarily barred from representing me as an owner or manager, using my veteran status or military records in financing or certification, submitting further documents in my name, or moving disputed company assets outside ordinary operating expenses without approval required by the order. The court also ordered the parties to preserve records. It was not a criminal conviction. It was not a final judgment. It was a locked door placed in front of the next lie. The lender kept the financing hold in place. The veteran certification application remained unable to proceed on the challenged ownership representation because federal certification requires a veteran to actually own and control the business, not simply appear as a majority owner in documents. Judith gathered her papers with both hands. At the aisle, she stopped in front of me. 40 families, she said. Whatever you think of us, remember that. I looked past her toward Tessa, who had come to observe from the back row after learning her job was tied to the dispute. Her lunch bag sat between her shoes, printed with tiny yellow lemons. I have remembered them from the beginning, I said. Judith searched my face for something, perhaps a promise that I would save the company, or a threat that I would destroy it. I gave her neither. Robert remained seated after the courtroom began to empty. When I walked back to him, he opened his hand and pushed the brass caliper toward me. For truth, he said. I closed my fingers around the cold metal. Across the room, Ethan watched me take the tool his father had carried for 3 decades. The false ownership claim had been stopped, the money had not moved, and their private story was now part of a court record. The harder question came after the victory. Could I protect the people inside the company without protecting the people who had used them as a shield? The injunction did not finish the case, it only stopped the next move. That Tuesday, the temporary injunction stopped the disputed ownership claim before any money was released under my name. Not $1 had moved. The lender kept the financing hold in place, the certification file remained blocked on ownership and control, and the court's record preservation order stayed in force. Over the following weeks, the lender reviewed every disputed transaction, the certification file stayed blocked on ownership and control, and Colleen surrendered her notary commission while her conduct was examined. Judith and Ethan dealt with separate counsel. Nobody was marched away in handcuffs, and my shoulders dropped an inch. Real consequences rarely arrive with music. Priya and I worked out an interim operating plan that protected ordinary payroll and health insurance, while an independent restructuring manager reviewed the business. I refused distributions for myself and insisted the same restriction apply to Ethan and Judith. Tessa Green, who had spent 16 years checking whether parts matched the specifications customers paid for, became operations director during the transition. When I told her, she looked at me over a vending machine coffee that had gone untouched. I thought you were going to shut us down. I am shutting down the lie, I said. The people doing honest work are a different matter. Coal Industrial eventually became smaller, but it survived. Tessa's son stayed in school, and the employees kept their insurance through the worst of the restructuring. Judith resigned from financial control. Ethan did not return to management while the investigations and civil case moved forward. I stopped attending meetings that did not require me. Accountability does not require permanent access. 2 weeks after the hearing, Ethan came to my house with the black fountain pen sealed in a clear evidence bag. Investigators had photographed it and released it through counsel. I thought you should have it back, he said. I looked at the silver clip, then at the porch railing we had painted together. A thin blue-gray line still marked one board where we had missed a drip. I do not want it. His eyes stayed on the bag. Maya, I loved you. I believe you did, he looked up. But when your father's company, your mother's approval, and my consent could not all survive together, you chose the one you thought would stay quiet. He glanced at the engagement ring on my hand. I removed it and placed it beside the evidence bag. Does telling the truth in court count for anything? He asked. It counts in court. He took the ring and left the pen. Months later, Robert asked me to visit. We sat on his porch with the brass caliper between us while late sunlight moved across the jaws of the tool. Company smaller, he said. Yes, people safe, most of them. He touched the caliper. Measures true. I kept it anyway. That tool sat on my desk for months before I understood why Robert trusted me with it. Nearly a year later, I opened a small consulting practice for veteran business owners. The first document I signed was my own operating agreement, using a plain steel fountain pen with no engraving. The signature ended short and sharp. 3 images stayed with me after everything else quieted down. Ethan's ring disappearing into his closed hand, Robert's caliper cold against my palm, and fresh black ink drying beneath a company name nobody else had borrowed from me. For most of my life, I thought loyalty meant carrying weight without asking who placed it on my shoulders. I know the difference now. Love can ask for sacrifice, but it cannot turn your identity into property and rename your silence as permission. They believed I would protect everyone except myself. They were almost right. The army had taught me to think about responsibility in layers. Protect the mission, protect the people beside you. Protect the record because memory becomes convenient when pressure arrives. For years, I carried those lessons into every room except the rooms where I loved someone. There I kept making exceptions. I told myself patience was maturity. I told myself restraint was kindness. I told myself that if I understood the pressure someone was under, I had a duty to absorb more of the damage. That is not loyalty. Loyalty does not require you to surrender the part of yourself that makes consent meaningful. It does not turn your name into a resource other people can allocate. It does not allow someone to decide that your values are so predictable they can be used as part of a business plan. Ethan and Judith understood that I cared about Robert. They understood that I cared about the employees, the health insurance, the mortgages, the sons and daughters whose lives depended on ordinary paychecks arriving when they were supposed to. They were right about all of that. What they misunderstood was the conclusion. Protecting innocent people did not require protecting the lie. That distinction became the line I could finally see clearly. I could ask the bank not to freeze ordinary payroll and still dispute every document carrying my name. I could help preserve a company long enough for honest employees to keep working, and still refuse to preserve the authority of the people who had built that company around a false version of me. I could remember every good thing Ethan had ever done and still end the relationship. Two truths can exist in the same room. Someone can love you and still betray you. Someone can be afraid and still choose deception. Someone can tell the truth eventually and still be accountable for every version they told before that. Compassion does not erase sequence. Context does not erase consent. I did not need Ethan to become a monster in order to leave him. That may have been the hardest part to understand. For a long time, I thought boundaries were easiest when the other person was obviously cruel. They are not. The hardest boundaries are often the ones you draw around people who once made you feel safe, people who remember how you take your coffee, people who move a paint can into the shade because they notice the small things. Good memories do not become false because trust ends. They simply stop being permission for what comes next. If you have ever protected a relationship so carefully that the other person began treating your restraint like consent, you may know that feeling. Maybe you kept one more secret for them. Maybe you explained away one more decision. Maybe you told yourself that speaking clearly would hurt too many people, so you carried the discomfort alone. Ask yourself a harder question. If nothing changes, who benefits from your silence? Sometimes accountability means walking into a courtroom. Sometimes it means saving an email instead of deleting it. Sometimes it means writing down the exact sentence someone used because you know they will remember it differently tomorrow. Sometimes it means saying no once and refusing to turn that no into a negotiation. And sometimes it means protecting the innocent people around a bad decision without protecting the people who made it. You are allowed to separate those things. You are allowed to care about what happens to a family, a company, a friendship, or a community without offering your identity as the price of keeping it intact. You are allowed to believe someone was under pressure and still hold them responsible for what they chose under that pressure. You are allowed to stop giving access to people you still understand. Accountability does not require permanent access. I never needed revenge. I needed the record to tell the truth. I needed the employees to keep what they had honestly earned. I needed my military service to stop functioning as a credential other people could borrow. And I needed my name to belong to me again. That is why the first signature in my new business mattered more than any court exhibit. Nobody applauded when I signed that operating agreement. There was no judge, no lender, no family argument, no champagne, no evidence bag. Just a plain steel pen, a clean page, and the short final stroke my hand had learned after the injury. It was mine. That was enough. If this story stayed with you, ask yourself something before you leave. Have you ever protected a relationship so carefully that the other person began treating your restraint like consent? And if someone crossed that line, what would accountability look like without punishing the innocent people around them? Tell me where you land in the comments. If you value stories about service, family, boundaries, and quiet consequences, like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next one. If someone in your life needs this reminder today, share this story with them. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next one. Ethan did not steal my money. He tried to steal my service. I put my name back where it belonged.